The Zephyrian detention facility on Kepler 442b was designed to break the strongest of wills. Its crystalline walls hummed with psychic dampeners, and the gravity generators could crush a being's spirit as easily as their bones. For 300 cycles, no prisoner had ever escaped or caused significant disruption to their perfectly ordered system. Then they brought in Marcus Chen. Commander Vexthul studied the human through the observation deck's reinforced transparasteel. The creature sat cross-legged in the center of his cell, eyes closed, breathing steadily despite the elevated CO2 levels that should have left him gasping. The detention protocols clearly stated that humans required specific atmospheric conditions to function optimally. Yet this one seemed to be thriving in an environment that should have incapacitated him within hours. "Status report on the human," Vexthul demanded, his mandibles clicking with irritation. Sub-Commander Krelax consulted her datapad, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "Physiological stress indicators remain nominal, Commander. Heart rate steady, neural activity peculiar, elaborate." Instead of the expected fear responses, we're detecting patterns consistent with meditation. The translation algorithms are struggling with the concept. Vexthul's chitinous plates shifted, a sign of profound confusion. The Zephyrians had conquered 17 star systems using psychological warfare. They understood fear, despair, and hopelessness as fundamental tools. But this human concept of deliberately calming one's mind in the face of adversity was incomprehensible. "Increase the pressure," he ordered. "Activate the sonic disruptors." The cell filled with a cacophony designed to shatter concentration and induce panic. Marcus opened his eyes slowly, tilted his head as if listening to music, then smiled. He began moving in flowing motions, what the database identified as Tai Chi. "Commander," Krelax's voice carried a note of alarm. "The sonic frequency is actually synchronizing with his movements. He's turning our torture device into a meditation aid." Below them, Marcus had begun humming, a low, resonant sound that seemed to harmonize with the disruptors. Other prisoners in adjacent cells had stopped their usual cowering and were listening, their own stress indicators dropping for the first time since incarceration. "Impossible," Vexthul snarled. "No being can transform suffering into strength. It violates the fundamental laws of psychological dominance." But Marcus was doing exactly that. On the second day, he had somehow fashioned exercise equipment from his food containers, turning the meager rations into a weight training system. By day 4, he was teaching breathing exercises to prisoners in neighboring cells through the walls, using a tapping code he'd developed. The facility's carefully maintained atmosphere of despair was beginning to crack. Dr. Zixandra, the facility's chief psychological manipulator, emerged from her private session with Marcus looking thoroughly defeated. Her usual confident demeanor had been replaced by something the Zephyrians rarely experienced: bewilderment. "Report," Vexthul commanded. "I attempted every proven technique, Commander. Fear induction, isolation anxiety, temporal displacement. Methods that have broken the strongest Arcturus warriors. But this human—" She paused, searching for words. He turned our interrogation into what he called a philosophical discussion. He asked me about my childhood, my dreams, my fears. Somehow I found myself talking about my clutch sister who died in the Rigel campaigns. And he expressed something called empathy. "Commander, I don't understand how weakness can feel so powerful." By day 7, the situation had escalated beyond containment. Marcus had somehow convinced the automated food dispensers to provide ingredients for what he called comfort food for the other prisoners. He'd organized exercise groups, established a prisoner education system, and had even gotten the notoriously antisocial crystalline entities to participate in group meditations. Most disturbing of all, the facility's guard rotation was requesting extended shifts near the human sector. Reports indicated that they felt calmer and more focused after listening to his daily talks through the intercom system. "He's rewriting the fundamental principles of incarceration," Dr. Zixandra reported during the emergency session. "Our entire doctrine assumes that beings will break under sufficient pressure. But this human seems to grow stronger through adversity and somehow shares that strength with others." Commander Vexthul studied the surveillance feeds in growing horror. What had once been a model detention facility was transforming into something unprecedented, a community. Prisoners who hadn't spoken in cycles were collaborating. Species that were natural enemies were working together. The facility's suicide rates had dropped to 0, while productivity in the prison workshops had increased by 300%. "What does he want?" Vexthul demanded. "That's the most confusing part, Commander. When I asked him directly, he said he wanted us to find better ways to resolve our differences. He suggested that we might learn more from treating prisoners humanely than from breaking them." Preposterous. How does weakness lead to control? I don't think he wants control, sir. He wants something he calls mutual respect. By day 10, Vexthul faced an impossible situation. The human had somehow transformed the most secure detention facility in the sector into a thriving rehabilitation center. Crime rates on the planet had actually decreased as former prisoners were released and became productive citizens, rather than broken shells. Standing before Marcus's cell one final time, Vexthul found himself asking a question that went against everything he understood about power dynamics. How? Marcus looked up from where he was teaching origami to a Centaurian war criminal and smiled. "You tried to break my body and I made it stronger. You tried to break my mind and I made it clearer. You tried to isolate me and I built community. You thought humans break under pressure, Commander, but we're actually forged by it. Your species makes no logical sense. Maybe that's exactly why we survive." 3 months later, the Zephyrian Council issued new detention protocols based on what they reluctantly termed the Chen method. Rehabilitation rates across their territories improved by orders of magnitude, and for the first time in their history, former enemies began requesting diplomatic negotiations instead of immediate surrender. Marcus Chen was eventually released, not because he had served his sentence, but because the Zephyrians realized they had more to learn from him as a free consultant than as a prisoner. Some say that's how the first human rewrote the rulebook of an entire galactic civilization, not through conquest or force, but through the simple, radical act of refusing to be broken.